One thing that I'm always trying to do is increase my efficiency whenever I'm working in Studio One. Any task, I'm always looking to simplify and improve things. So a couple weeks back, I did a video that outlined and spoke about the different processes that I go through when I'm archiving and rendering mixes, specifically when I'm working with hardware. Now, after that, I ended up having a conversation with a friend, and we were talking about the benefits or the pros and the cons of rendering offline versus listening to your mix in real time and printing things. Now, also, when we talk about working with external hardware, we don't have a choice. We have to listen to our mix in its full completion from start to front at least once. But when I was doing the video, one thing that kind of, I was thinking in the back of my mind is I really have to streamline my workflow so that instead of printing this mix 2 times, because one time I'm activating a limiter, which is the mix that gets sent out to the client, and then the other time I want to take the limiter off because that's the mix that I want to print that would go out to mastering. So in this video, I thought we would cover that. So I've got a really basic setup here in terms of a session. I've got things laid out so we can see it cleanly. And on some of these tracks, we have some hardware processing. So on this kick track over here, it's going through an ADL 700. On this clap track over here, it's going through a Pultec. And then our whole entire mix is going through a bus compressor. So we have 3 different pieces of hardware that we have to take into account for this scenario. Now, in terms of the actual process that I use, not much has changed here. So if we show all of the tracks, just like I did in the previous video, I've created a print track for each one of these that matches the channel width. So you can see this clap track, I've actually made this mono. So the print track is mono. And then this track over here, the kick, this is stereo, and I'm using a stereo instance of my ADL 600, channels 1 and channel 2 linked together. So none of that has changed. Now notice I've also have takes to layers that I've enabled. So when we do this printing, it happens in one nice shot, and we can do different layers for our different revisions of the mix. Now the main thing that's changed over here is, as opposed to having my limiter happening on my mix bus, so over here for example, what I basically did is I took my mix bus, which would normally be routed directly to the main outs, and I would normally do a print and then turn off my limiter and then do another print. I've set this up so that we can have a one-pass printing workflow in this actual template. So all that means is that this bus gets sent to another bus, in this case, bus 2. Let's move this limiter now to bus 2. Now, all I'm doing is I'm adding one more bus into this structure. Now, these print tracks, I've just color-coded them to match the bus that they belong to. And also, I've left these in terms of their default name, but let's call this one Mix Bus, and let's call this one Mix Loud. So that helps us visualize things a little bit more in terms of how I have this laid out. So now that this is all laid out, I'm doing the exact same thing I was in the previous video. I've set my cycle range to be the full duration, and I'm enabling auto punch over here. Now, one other minor change that I've made in this case is I want to take all of these print tracks. So I'm going to hold down Command, and I'm going to single click all of the audio tracks, and I'm going to create a group. And let's call this print / archive. Okay, now in terms of the group attributes, I have my group labels showing here. This is something that you can do over here if you want to be able to see them. Where are they over here? Group, I believe it's group assignments. Then we can see them from here. I'm going to right click. First of all, let's change the color. I want something really bright so that this stands out. Now I'm going to choose the attributes that I want the group to be part of. Editing, we'll leave that on. Volume, we don't need that on. We don't need inserts, we don't need sends, but I want mute solo, record monitor, and editing to be the attributes for this group. That means that if I mute any of these, they will all mute, and if I record enable any of these, they will all record enable. Okay, so I'm going to mute and record enable them. And the next thing that we need to do is, now that we're ready to print this, instead of me having to run one pass in its completion, and then activate my limiter or deactivate my limiter and then run another pass, we can do this all in one shot, because keep in mind, this is just simple routing that we're doing here. So I'm going to close or collapse my mixer, and let's go back to the very beginning. I'm going to take my loop off, and notice I have takes to layers enabled, and also notice that on the track name that I have _version 1.0. There's a reason for this. We're going to get to that in a minute. So once this is all set up, it's very easy. All we have to do is just enable the print. So I'm just recording this, and this of course is happening in real time. You can see I have my kick print. You can see I have my clap print. It's in mono. The actual mix before it hits the limiter, but through the mix bus processing. And then this one over here is the loud version of my mix. Okay. So now, if I want to listen to any one of these, let's click one of these, and because they're part of a group, they will all, the record arm state will disappear for all of them. Okay, so now if I want to listen to just my mix, whoops, I don't know why this one is set to mix loud. That needs to be set to main outs. If I want to listen to just the mix, then I can solo this track. So that's what I would send out to mastering. And this one over here, this is my full duration. This is my full mix with a limiter on it. Now the benefits here is that if I needed to export any of these, let's temporarily toggle our groups off. I could just open up my browser and I could navigate to a section over here. We could go to, for example, the desktop, and I could simply select this event and I could drag this right to the desktop, and I would be exporting my mix basically the same way as I was rendering it. And that would be happening based on the actual sample rate and resolution that you have set in your song setup. So I can do a drag and drop mix export of either one of these. And then obviously if I needed to export an MP3 or something like that, we could also just, I'm going to Alt solo this out. We have the cycle range already set. I could just set this to an MP3 and I could export, you know, in this case, that would be the louder mix that I would export. But this is just a one pass print. Now, here's where this kind of all ties together for me. I have takes to layers enabled, and in the changes that we have with the layers in Studio One version 5, if I was to update this name, or let's say that I wanted, this was my first pass of the mix, and then I had a version 1.1 or a version 1.0b, I'm going to go File, Save As, and this time, let's go V1.0b. We'll click Save. So now I've saved a new version. This could be done with the internal versions in the Studio One song, or this could just be done just like this. And now I'm going to re-enable, reactivate my groups. Now, if I select one of these, all of the events that are part of that group will show up. I'm going to delete these now, and I'm going to change the name, or rather I'm going to add a B to each one of these passes over here, each one of these tracks that we're printing. This one over here as well. Okay, so now let's say that I made a change in my actual mix. So maybe I changed this level a little bit, and this was brought down, this was brought up, maybe this was brought down a little bit. So essentially now we have a new mix. It's the exact same thing. Just going to close my browser. We'll go back to the beginning, and all we need to do is record enable 1. They're all record enabled. And we're printing now a version 1.0b, and we're printing everything together. So I have an archived version of all of the tracks individually that were going out to the hardware. I have my actual mix, and then I have my loud mix again. All right. Now here's another reason that I decided to make this change. Let's take these out of record mode. By default, this event name is going to take on the new name that we named this track. But let's say that somebody ends up saying, okay, well, I like your version 1.0b mix, but can we go back to the clap the way it was in version 1.0? Now, maybe I've changed the hardware and I didn't recall that. If you've printed this mix will now be available. When I expand these layers, I can see version 1.0 take 1 and version 1.0b take 1. So for example, if I needed to recall that, I could just choose this layer content over here. Now I have version 1.0 in the actual archive track. So let me just undo that for a moment. So let me clarify that one more time, just because it's a little bit confusing. If I want to be able to recall any of my mixes, I'm using the takes to layers and also adding this extra bus layer and putting the limiter just on one individual bus allows me to print kind of like my pre-master and my loud version of my mix all in one pass, and I don't have to listen to it twice. I can do it one time. Creating that group and assigning those attributes, that just gives us a little bit more control in terms of, instead of having to record enable each single one or mute every single one, they're going to follow each other. And then if I was to needing to go to a version 1.0C or something like that, as we know, let's save this. We'll do one more save as, and this one we'll call 1.0C. The minute I've saved that new mix, my first step is going to be selecting all of these events. They're on the top layer now, getting rid of them, and then just adding in now a C, and just copying and pasting that right like this. Now, for me, I've been using this kind of modified version of my previous workflow, and it's been doing really good for me. The other benefit you have here is that when you're running through hardware, sometimes you're going to run through hardware and then maybe you wait an hour and you come back and you run another print. It might be different. The other benefit from working this way is that at any given point in time, all of these stems or these audio events that we're printing, whether they're mono or stereo, whether we're listening to just the mix or the loud version of the mix, you have kind of the peace of mind in knowing that they will always be the same. There is no change. You're not going to open up the compressor tomorrow and then all of a sudden it's going to be 1 dB quieter than it was the day before, which I've had happen to me when I'm archiving mixes. I always like to do a null test just to make sure. But with this, you kind of have that peace of mind that everything you've printed in this one pass stem printing workflow, it will all be the same. And you also have the benefit of being able to recall previous mixes within the actual individual layers that are kind of nested in these individual tracks. And you can see the actual take names and everything. It's very easy to be able to recall that. Anyways, that's all the time I have available for today. I hope that you enjoyed this content. If you did, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Any questions or comments, leave them down below. I'll do my absolute best to get back to you. And as always, we will catch you in the next video. Cheers.